Hi, I'm Alexis Thomas, and I'm with The Right Place. We are a creative agency with a couple of office locations, one here in Pella, Iowa, and another that I work from in Lakeville, Minnesota. I've been with the business for about 17 years, and I purchased The Right Place a couple of years ago. I'm here to chat with you guys today about what it's like to manage employees at a couple of different remote office locations. I've actually found that there are a lot of benefits to having two locations, one in Pella and one in Minnesota. One of the big ones is that we have naturally an expanded customer base because we've got employees working in both locations. They're out in the community, they're connecting, we're networking, we're doing activities, and just naturally through word of mouth, we've expanded our potential customer base just by connecting and living in a couple of different communities. Another thing that I have found is that we've got an even bigger hiring pool. It's very easy to hire an intern or temporary employee that doesn't need to work on site. They can come to Pella or Lakeville, whichever one is closer, and get trained for a couple of days. We can set up a good workflow. They can get familiar with our clients and our processes. And then they can head back to wherever it is that they are located, and we can resume and have a really good working relationship. So I get that flexibility and that support. I think another benefit that you can consider if you are wondering whether or not having multiple office locations is worth it is that it does allow for a lot of flexibility for your employees too. That might be a very important perk that someone is looking for that's a great fit for your job, but who isn't willing to relocate. So as a business owner, if you can offer that flexibility and ability to stand up a remote workplace for them, you might get a better person for your role. And ultimately, that's going to lead to more success for your company. Another kind of a benefit and a challenge, actually, that the pandemic brought to the forefront was the states were handling businesses operating during the pandemic differently at different times during the pandemic. Because we were members of chambers in both those states, those chambers were out there paying attention to what was changing, making sure that members like The Right Place got the information that we needed so that we could continue to operate within the guidelines that both those states were giving us in both of our locations. So I highly recommend that businesses do become members of business organizations like their local chambers, because they are a huge source of support, especially when challenging things like the pandemic come up. I think one of the questions I get asked the most often is, how do you communicate with your team when you've got different office locations? And that answer is lots of different ways. We don't have a preferred method of communication. You've just got to use what makes sense in a given situation. And another thing that we have found over the years is that communication takes a lot of work, and it's not going to be the same communication method that works for every person, even if the situation is the same. So part of it is also patience, especially when we're not in the same room and can't read body language, and just knowing the person that you're working with and maybe adapting your communication style to work for them. Some of the communication tools that we use as a team regularly are video conferencing, of course, email, good old-fashioned phone calls, and then an inter-office instant messaging system. Video conferencing has really been something we've picked up on a lot more in the last 2 or 3 years. And again, it's one of those silver linings of the pandemic, I think. We have been using Microsoft Office, which comes with Teams, and that has been a huge game changer for us because we can call and video call within our team, and it doesn't take a lot of work to get that set up or scheduled. One of the most utilized tools within that video conferencing for us, especially when we're doing design work, is screen sharing. It's a lot easier for someone to share their screen, especially as a designer, when you're trying to point out a very specific thing to someone. And we can collaborate then as a team, and we have a little bit of that benefit of reading facial expressions and body languages then too, and can work through those project changes and understand each other a lot more quickly than we would if we were trying to do it over the phone. Now, there are cases when a phone call just makes so much more sense, especially when you compare it to an email. In an email, if it's stuck becoming a lengthy, long, drawn out back and forth, it's a pretty good sign that you should pick up the phone and just call someone. Something that could take a day's worth of emails back and forth is something that might be solved in 5 minutes on the phone. So one of the things that we stress in our culture is that a phone call doesn't need to be something that you've scheduled with someone. It's okay to pick up the phone and call if something looks like it's going to become one of those long back and forth emails, and ask that person, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Let's just get this resolved quick. So that's something I always encourage our team to remember, to not fall back into that habit of email communication because it feels easier. I would say that sometimes email communication actually makes things a lot more difficult. And another thing that we have used regularly is that inter-office messaging, instant messaging. We use Slack. We've been using that for a couple of years. We really like the fact that Slack offers different channels that we can sort our clients into. And so I can drop a message into one of those channels. An example of when I would use that over if I would send an email would be if there was a social media post that was going up and I just wanted to alert someone else that it was up and they could take a look at it and be aware that it was out there. That would be a quick use of an instant message. That way we don't have another email sitting in our inbox that we need to delete or manage at the end of the day or the week when we're trying to keep things cleaned up, because it's just sitting in that instant message. A couple of situations that we found that emails are the most effective communication tool are if we're queuing up a project to get handed off. We can do a quick overview, but put some good detail into that overview and hand off for our colleague, and then they can keep that and print it off and use it as a checklist if they need to. Or if we're starting a project with a client, the email might include a timeline. That is a method that I would use an email for, because that, again, it's something a little bit lengthier, a little bit more detailed, something that is helpful to have that written record to refer back to. Another method where we would use email is to to recap after a meeting. If we've had a meeting with a vendor on behalf of a client, I would typically type up a quick note that explains all of the key points of the meeting and send that off to the client again, so they have that record that they can look back to whenever they need to. I also meet monthly with each of our staff members, and the goal of that meeting is more geared towards career development. So once a year, we do have a big review together, and we'll go over progress for the year, opportunities that we have to improve or learn something new in the coming year, and then we'll schedule that out. And then every month, we have the meeting about what's progressed on that list of opportunities for career growth that we've established. And we do also take some of that time, if needed, to go over some client projects. But mainly those meetings are geared toward growth, development, because I find that that is something that we need to focus on as a smaller business to help everyone feel fulfilled and excited about working for us. Beyond our regularly scheduled meetings, we do have a lot of tools that we use on a day-to-day basis to keep each other on task, informed, and keep all of the individuals moving forward on the projects that we're working on for our clients. One of the things that we found the most helpful is in Microsoft Office. It's called the Planner, and it gives us the ability to create different buckets for different clients. So I would say we have probably 20 to 30 buckets going at any given time. And then within those client buckets, we can set up different project work boards. And I can go in there and create a task and assign it to a staff member. There's a place to put notes and a checklist and a deadline. It's very, very helpful for them to get that in their email, and then they can go check it out on the planner, and they can check it off and it falls off the board when it's done. So that's one thing that we really love to use is Microsoft Planner. When we're working on projects that can span several months, and most often for us, that's a website design or a book publishing project, we do have process documents in place that include checklists for the various phases of the projects. We all print those out. We keep them by the desk. And if we're working on it, we need to check those off we found that physically checking those off is a good quality control piece for us. And then we can also have that shared between the different team members working on the different project. And so they can check in and make sure that the person has moved on from their task and it's now time for me to pick up my piece of the task. One final tool that I'll share about that we use for collaboration is from Adobe Creative Suite. It's just really cool as a creative agency to get to share some of the pieces about how we work. Within Adobe Creative Suite, we've got the ability to create libraries for each of our clients. And into those libraries, we can save their brand color palette, their most recent logos, photos they use frequently, object styles, and it just makes it so much quicker to place things in their newsletters or their catalogs because it's all stored right there. We know we can put the most frequently used items in that library. And it doesn't matter which team member created that library to start with. All we have to do is share that with another Creative Cloud user, and then it's right there at their fingertips too. So we can always be sure that we've got the most recent version of anything that we need to be using and that we're pulling from the same pool of assets for that client and for that brand. Accountability is something that you have to consider when you're hiring people to work at offsite locations who aren't going to be sitting next to their supervisor on a day-to-day basis. One of the things that I have found you've got to do is just screen for that when you're hiring. And by that, I mean, you want to hire self-starters. You want to hire people who get reward out of getting the job done and are passionate about what they're doing. Because then naturally, they're going to hold themselves more accountable and be able to move through their task lists on their own with less direct supervision than someone who is less motivated or isn't a self-starter. For time tracking at the right place, which goes along with accountability, we use QuickBooks Pro Timer. It's an online tool, and within that timer, we have categories for our clients and then many sub jobs within those client categories, and we clock in and out of those categories. As the manager, I do have the ability to see who's clocked in and where they're working from. So that is another tool that not only is useful, of course, for bookkeeping and invoicing, but also for seeing that what my team is working on and when they're working on it. As a leader, another thing that I try to do to encourage accountability in my team members is to be accountable myself. And if I've messed up or made a mistake, to share that with my team, and if possible, use that for an opportunity to come together and problem solve. So an example would be recently I was in charge of ordering some pens, and I left for the event that I needed the pens for and realized I didn't have the pens. I didn't have anything to hand out. And ultimately, the company had canceled my order and I could not find an email from them, but I could have been checking in and remembered before the day of that I was missing a piece that I planned to bring along. So I called the team and told them what had happened and that I hadn't stayed on top of it. And now we didn't have these pens. And within an hour, we had a backup plan created together from some resources that we already had. So the solution was quick. It gave us an opportunity to work together and solve a problem. And my team members realized that when I mess up, I'm not going to be afraid to share that with them. And hopefully then they also in turn will come to me if there's a problem that we need to work through. And we all get to a solution more quickly.